Our reading today is going to feature three readers, Barbara Bosch, Naomi Myrvaagnes, and David Wyman. And we'll hear each poet followed by a short Q&A. So feel free to, at that point, to ask your questions or put them in the chat, and then we'll have an open mic. So welcome, everyone. Maybe we'll get started. So I'm Wendy Drexler, and I'm co-chair of programming for the New England Poetry Club. Thank you so much for coming today. Barbara Bosch is going to be our first reader. Barbara's poems have been published in Cha, an Asian literary journal, Poet Lore, Solstice, SWWIM, Upstreet, and other literary magazines. Which Will Change the Other More from Finishing Line Press is her first chapbook. Her work has received prizes and has appeared in a word image museum exhibition. She resides in Brookline, Massachusetts with her husband, Edward. So welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Wendy. The last name is pronounced Boches. But
Boches. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. We were so busy with my panicking over screen share that we didn't get to that. But I want to thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to read from my new chapbook, Which Will Change the Other More. And I mentioned screen sharing, so hold your breath. Hopefully this will work. It's not that one. Okay. Can everybody see? I wanted to use a screen share because this first poem has Chinese characters I wanted you to see. I am not fluent in Mandarin, but I have studied it and fascinated by the way characters are translated and the meanings and back and forth. So I will be taking in each stanza, I will take one character, introduce one character, give you the translation for it. Then I will add the character for the heart to it and show you what the new meaning is when the two are together. Sometimes it will be straightforward, and sometimes I hope you will find it as surprising and delightful as I do. The heart in Chinese. The heart in Chinese is xing in a high flat tone, an ideogram, usually joined with another, when the two, either set side by side or over under, will take on new meaning. As spring's scents join the heart to make a young woman's heart unfolding, each soft wing of the tender-hearted without any foreboding that love, drunk with love, can obsess, to possess lilacs and blossom, that the insistent self can bristle, jealous of stigma and pistil, so zealous as love shifts slowly into load, to bow in worry, and wind stirs furious, cold, disillusioned petals fall bruised, matted, glued. The intimate persists and twists, resisting, fears that widen, wanting relief. Fire grows into ardor's ash. Love discouraged and racked with rue flees to forget until spring returns, when the heart whispers, make yourself small, be careful. I love in a playground with Chinese mothers run around, and in America you'd say, be careful, and they run around saying, small heart, small heart, small heart. My next poem, also on a China theme, is a picture of a silk spinner in a Chinese alleyway in an old part of Beijing. She takes a cocoon, a teeny cocoon, and spreads it over that great big arch, and then winds the filament and it will be used to make silk thread. The other thing I will tell you about this poem, she's one focal point. There's a parasol tree, and a parasol tree in China has blooms that look like tiny parasols. After the pedicab ride, outside the Beijing silk shop, it's drizzling. A spinner in the alley winds filament into thread as cinnabar, ceramics, painted bamboo and swallow scrolls, blue willow tea sets, and great wall cigarillos draw tourists to wood-framed windows, while we huddle under red umbrellas near a parasol tree, while the guide shouts about mulberry leaves and larvae. The spinner on the stone stoop under tiled eaves barely glances at us Caucasian parents with our Chinese-born girls, though her fingers freeze for a moment while scarves for sale flutter in the slightest breeze. From the shop door, a sharp call rapid claps as if to chase off a pigeon or cat. The startled spinner bends toward her bowl of boiled cocoons. I wondered if these young women who spin, paint, or polish jade, if any had to give up her daughter. I have met Li Chuan, who fled to the States. Family planning uniforms had taken her month-old because she already had a son. One tired girl tugs at her mother, who murmurs to wait. She wants to watch the spinner swoop a nub into gossamer sail, then reel, but she won't, because the other daughters pull away from the tree with the thousands of shivering parasols. Now we're going to come back to the States, to Massachusetts and Roxbury. And this is a tough poem, but I decided to read it because there's a lot in the news this week about immigration and asylum. And this is one personal story about an asylum seeker. I will give a trigger warning towards the end of this poem, which I will not show you the last two stanzas, because it includes a brief description of a violent act that happened to her. If you don't want to hear it, as we get to the end of this page, just turn off your sound. The asylum seeker enters softly, her firm step and swaying hips gone as she slips beside me, whispering, "God, please forgive me." Long fingers press against eyelids. There, maybe, her children flit. Did they ever exist? I can't help the thought. A wall between us, though through it I glimpse cracks in which flash uniforms and fists. Two middle-aged women. We settle in a church basement. I tutor her. She sleeps in a shelter. Our wall only in part from different tongues. Other bricks are mine. I don't want to accept her tale, preferring it to be a ruse to gain legal status. If only a fraction's true, and this much is, she was a prostitute and had me call her lawyer to hear the next, then she has lived hard enough. And if all her lawyer added's real, if the rest doesn't belong to someone else, then how does she wake, sleep, or speak to God of her penance? One girl taken, the other cut from her uterus. I shudder as she sobs, sinks from chair to floor, her fist like a silent gavel, up and down. My next poem is about a larger class in the same domestic abuse survivor shelter. This one is about a group of women, about usually 80% Latina, 15% Asian, and 5% other backgrounds, who would start the class almost silent, many of them. But because it was a feel-good class, they would eventually learn to speak up. And for that reason, each of these stanzas takes a vowel that sometimes speaks and sometimes is silent. And I'm sorry for my pronunciation of the Spanish at the beginning. Beatitudes o sobrevivientes de violencia doméstica en ESOL class. Blessed is the fluorescence for those long taught not to speak, now learning that does not have to refrain. Blessed is the plush laminate, the long tables lined with those who once quailed before Cain, now learning that does not have to lie silent. Blessed is the linoleum, the cork dust beneath those who used to kneel to keening, now learning the silence of E at the end of refuge and escape. And jumping over to San Francisco. In this poem, the italicized words are an English translation of an aria from Madame Butterfly. In the Assisted Living Center, San Francisco, the bed cups uncle into a broken moon, a crescent of crepe skin draping bones, vague likeness to the soldier in the snapshot he hands me on a beach with Patton's men who'd marched there from Cherbourg. On my iPad, I play him an aria from Madonna Butterfly, Renata Tebaldi, our favorite. One fine day we will see. His eyes, redden and close, nobody aboard thinking of war. The ship appears, the white ship, 10,000 on a carrier, but more like an island of boys he swore climbing hammock over hammock. He speaks of sun and breeze, moonlight and men and idyll. Impossible to believe in AUKUS after D-Day. But I nod because we are a family that tucks discomfort into drawers. Zuni Cafe, azure boa, red stilettos, pink lame. Transvestites, samba past our table. Little wife, sweet scent of verbena, the names he called me. Uncle leans over roast, something to murmur, sex isn't important at my age. Unsure what to say, I smile. Who couldn't guess? Out of the city crowds a man. Yet even after he added Jay's name to the deed, and they lived as man and man 40 years, even after Jay died and left everything to Uncle, our family silently folded to stow away what had once swayed over a star-spangled ocean. My last poem is about this photograph taken by my husband. And we entered a word and image exhibition at the Griffin Brook Museum of Photography. He had asked me to pick from a number of his photographs and write a poem about it. This is the one I picked, and this is my final poem. Japanese Stuartia, Arnold Arboretum. A gardener wonders if she might have done something long ago for the one thin in the shadow of his brother, born on the wrong side of rising storms and winds as the thicker stem bends from its own kin. She did prune wounds back to the collar, yet scars yawn, and too little sprouts, while the other easily branches and leaves. Could she have gone farther to find nature's favoring and trimmed the stronger for the weak? Survival of the fittest being the rule, and herself not one to scissor roots, wire branch, or defoliate for aesthetics' sake. Why here does she feel the need for more symmetry? Perhaps if one withers and drops, the other will be lost to fungus and rot, when what she wants is Hercules and young Iolaus, brandishing the torch, back to back, facing the onslaught. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Barbara. That was really powerful. Wow. Took us many, many places. And I felt that last poem kind of resonated with all the other poems you'd read, even though you were talking about a tree. That was wonderful. I forgot to mention, as some people are already posting in the chat, that if you would like to read in the open mic, to feel free to let us know there, and we will collect names. Okay. So our next reader will be Naomi Myrvaagnes. And Naomi earned her undergraduate degree in philosophy, analytic school, and her poetry and fiction are shaded by that filter. She has published sparingly in periodicals ranging from the Christian Science Monitor to Onthebus. Her first published story in the Harvard Review received a Pushcart Special Mention. In writing, Naomi strives to both represent and comment on the world we inhabit. Welcome, Naomi. Naomi, I think you're muted.
I'll start thanking you again, the New England Poetry Club, for putting on this event. And that's more than a perfunctory thank you. I want to acknowledge the extraordinary volunteer effort that goes into running this organization, which is so welcoming and which has been so sustaining to people who care about poetry, especially during the past 2+ difficult years. It's a privilege to be reading to an audience of poets, a little scary too. I know you have incredible ears and you have learned to hear and transcribe language into Zoom chats faster than the eye can follow. In honor of National Poetry Month, I'll start with a poem I wrote in response to one of the readings in this Sunday series. Your poetry reading. Sitting with you, you pat a cushion on your listening bench. Draw me over to inhabit your ear. You lend my eye your lens. I follow as you call on each scintilla of time past, your modest reach, muted longing. You intone softly, let me feel the ember warmth of the fire, the tingle of the mosquito. I become the shallow water shuddering under the plash of the oar. Scenes reassemble as you move back in. No props, no coaxing, honesty exerting its pressure. Your steady recording. Taste again and let go. Yourself as vessel, not devourer. your hand so still, stirring the ripples to speak, then settle. You embrace together memorial and guest. They merge now. And so it is, my breath stutters and I fill with tears. A pandemic poem. This was written from a visual image, one that took me way back to my time living in the city. An Obad, as I'm sure you know, is a dawn song with suggestions of greeting, departing, or warning. Obad, March 2020. How are you, my city? Me, I'm here, sealed in. I'm studying the day as it launches itself. I'm studying your shapes, my city, pondering your energies. Dark, 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 your window squares. Behind them, we are waking, all of us peering outward for news. The horizontal sun pushes a little higher, steadily anticipates descent, perpetuates the cycle of light and dark we gape at. Is it really you, my city? I raise the shade to you. Where are your people? Your varied hues of coffee, cream, lemonade, the green leaves and blades of grass. Where is your riot of laughter, your trumpeting, the little dogs yipping, the mobbing sparrows? We who hunker in our rooms are waiting for the dust to settle, the blood to dry, the breath to come, the miracle. Are you my city? Towers loom, dirt brown. Are they sentinels, silos, cradling missiles at the ready? Or keeps where snipers crouch at slits of opportunity? Are they chimneys to fill with ashes? Veiled by morning mist, the tall cylinders loll among the city's angles and boxes, fat sky climbing. How shall I sing to you, my city? Low sun, morning, another startup. We pray to persist as the sun persists. Pink and coral, blotchy echoes of peony and oriole fleck your walls, while the sulky white sky smears across you, my city, like a final snow, whispering, back to sleep now, no help from up here, no promises, only the ghost smile of a summer day, masked at the end of a summer night. Now I'll read 4 poems from my book, Chamber of Wonders. The first poem that I'll read includes the title of the collection, A Cleansing. It is a closed chamber of wonders in which the waters whoosh and wash. All that are dirty, thrashed and rinsed, all that is clouded, made clear. The God works here, hidden, then heat and glow, the satisfied exhalations of the saved when the heavy stone is rolled away. Guardian. The child will follow his shadow tonight. From the window, the rope waits, abrupted, dry. Loaf underarm, he listens for the last shoe. Flight will bear him away, and 2, he has never, he is 9. He will follow the rope to his shadow. With a tune only he can hear, he descends. The rope hangs gold in the moonlight, awaiting his flight from the window. He has never before tonight. Abrupt and shy, armed with his loaf, holding his shoe, his heart in flight. I flutter above him, high as moonlight, seeking his window. Pale in shadow, his golden flight, my own, my nine, below the rope, the loaf, the heart, I float, silent, shy. Night train. In the dark of the dream, I lead him to the black train that will stop for him. A whisper will gather him into the dark coach. In the black bands of lava dust we tread, bands mantling the set alone hill, we trace rings of ashes. There's no station, no sign, no track for the silent car that moves according to plan, that is due. The mother's task is to know the hour, to prepare, to tie up ends. The mother packs for the child. I cannot remember what led me to write this next poem years ago. I have never fished. I have never watched anyone fish. About a month ago, I had the pleasure of reading Jeanette. I'm not sure if it's Hayen or Hayen, Haien, her short novel, The All of It, which just happens to begin on a rainy morning as a local parish priest stands fishing in an Irish salmon stream. Somehow my poem knew all about it. The hook. The angler is partly bored sitting so long with his slack line dangling. In the languid current, the line droops, tricked out with its gaudy fake fly. The spotted fish darts, brisk and hidden, his eye bright with lust and ire. Back and forth he swims. The fish is partly aware of everything. Swish, swish. He casts his gurgle for the current to catch and pass along, belch up elsewhere. Surprise, but tires first. The man still sits. The fish weakens, drifts toward the lure. Pricked, he jerks his body off the hook, gasps downstream to rage. Now he slights all camouflage and tricks, the drag of panoply and battle. He charges back to be seen straight through, to clamp jaws shut and make it true. The addressee of the next poem is the vegetable, B-E-E-T. Excuse me. Sanctity of the beet. You didn't know you'd been bred for beauty. True, your green crown, bushy, waving in the wind, glowed like neon under the sun. Harvested, tresses lopped, here you are. So much blood and wine in one dense body. Food, yes, but first, worship for the eye, the human eye that loves more than it absolutely needs. The next poem is thinking about Deuteronomy 12, 15 to 16. Lesson. This is the Lord's instruction for eating. The blood you shall dash on my altar or pour on the ground. You shall not eat the blood, therein the life. Lesson learned. Eat we must, and kill we choose. It's plastic wrap now to partition the life from the succulents, the life we need to put far out of mind from the animal we savor. So when it chirped at me in the dark backyard near the heap I nourish of rotting matter, I paid to have the rat poisoned. I couldn't handle it, the rat, the little bait box, the poison. Not to see the limbs and fur and twitchy whisker of the murky thing, going dead probably underground, or if visible, to be hauled away by the professional who will come so quietly he won't even ring the doorbell to announce himself. Excuse me. The one, the two. Talking to myself, talking. Hearing, yap and heel, a one, a two, I, we, indivisible. Conundrum for philosophers. Substance, form, higher, lower. Figure the errant cackle, the unstoppable ear, and count who hobbles in our sack. The finish line cheering, return, return, return. I scratch my head, the one hand's scratching for the two. Oh, to be outward bound, to be one simple, round, mute embrace. The beat goes on, prate, orate, rage, lament, enumerate. Come, you'll always find us in, together, for life, for good, doing our congenital, crabbed, bodacious twosome. The concluding poem is from Chamber of Wonders, and the salute at the end of the poem invokes a favorite barn in Goshen, Massachusetts. Essay on purpose. What's the point? Some people ask. They ask because they're trained. They're truffle snufflers, pointed to bring it home and be rewarded. Oink, they oink, in language a little pointy, a little shrill, and untrue. Oinking is a made-up pointitude about pigs, pig nature. Real pigs grunt and sputter and snort. Maybe baby pigs oink, those whose voices haven't settled yet in heaps of flesh, as have the voices of porkers and sows, ripe tons that know life means making a living under dung-splatted rafters in the dank barn, on the concrete slab once clean, but now a wet slough in which to stand wide, paw, excrete, lie down. Pigs, you heavy mounds, you keep warm with one another, owning barely a coat of skin around your swelling fat and muscle. Yes, your pink shows as if you lack hair, hair that wraps the bossies in their stanchioned private stalls. Nearly naked in the visible breath each of you exhales, you consort, bump together, meal restively, your little ones learning quickly to trot out from under treading hooves. They oink, squeal, occasionally prance. Their movements tense and streaking as they practice, shift and shuffle, snake through, retreat, sneak forward for the morsel, lunge and swallow. Pigs of Barras barn, I salute you. Roundness is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Wendy.
Roundness is all indeed. Beautiful, beautiful poems. Really had me thinking about choices that we make or don't make, and I really enjoyed your personification of my city in that Obad. Yeah, I think such a your perspective shifted so much during that time, and I love the way you capture that. So thank you, and we are going to post where to purchase the books. Thank you, Mary. So please do support the poets and buy their books. So yeah, thank you, Mary. You've done 2 of the 3, and David is coming up next. So happy to introduce David Wyman. David's second poetry collection, Violent Ideologies, was published in 2020 by Kelsey Books. His first book, Proletariat Sunrise, also published by Kelsey Books, came out in 2017. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Blazebox, Dissident Voice, Zombie Logic Review, Clockwise Cat, The Voices Project, Squawk Back, Tuck Magazine, The Aurorian, among other publications. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Wendy and the NEPC crowd here. It's kind of an honor to read with these folks. I've really enjoyed the poems very much. This is what my book looks like, the cover of it. The title is a little bit of a play on words. Violet is contained in the word violent with an N. And I tend to think of ideology as something that is violent and oppressive mostly, though not always. And taking the N out kind of takes out a little bit. I never really know what to say about my poems, so I tried to figure something out here that would sort of go together. Starting with a line in the title poem in my first book, Proletariat Sunrise, which is this: in a climate where more and more identities are expressed through consumer choices. And that was kind of the discovery or the epiphany that I had at the end of that book that became a bit of an obsession about capitalism, and mainly the idea of the way capitalism commodifies everything. The self, experience, everything. And for poetry, it's the lyric self, imagination, desire, virtually all experiences there. I came to that idea reading Walden some years ago. And then I also found it in some other books. I'm going to read a quote here that sort of sets up the first poem. It's from a writer named Thomas Frank, who writes a lot of kind of leftist books. What Happened to Kansas, Listen Liberal is another one, Conquest of the Cool. This is from one of his essays. He said, "We will be able to achieve no distance from business culture since we will no longer have a life, a history, a consciousness apart from it." And that's kind of contained in the title poem, which is a prose poem. I take more liberties in my prose poetry for some reason. It's built a lot on association and image and in the language itself. So this is Violet Ideologies, the actual poem. Let the poem, as poems do, talk about itself, not what or how, but that. Resist a category of invented words chronologically culled by the poet himself, daubed in red ochre, and rescued from syntax, cradle and all. Warts appear, then disappear spontaneously. I said, I'm partly Dave too, a beast that wants discourse. Anarchists question the Flushing portrayal of people as skinny, beautiful, wicked, sexy, frequently with such dexterity. I dreamt this cruise was all inclusive, that my dreams are all inclusive, beyond the picturesque representation of the glorification of randomly common household objects. White leopard for avatar, active suitor. Later, cuttlefish for breakfast, peacock sightings in Cancun, and the commercial being an image of the sun's magnetic field. But I get the feeling I've copied this before. Light, illuminate, enlighten, finagles its own trope. But every bad movie ends, Katerina. Blogging is a great way to soothe your mind. Tomorrow's sunlight gleams on white semantic fields. I try and break out of the funk I'm in, but Frank says it has become our imagination. It has become our power to envision. By the time they were both done running, he gives the image and can see his feet burning. And he said the color red, said, "Save me the hectoring." So I'm going to jump to one later on in the book, if I can hopefully find the pages. The next book is called, the next poem is called A Guest of the Internationals, partly based on some dreams, a dream that I had, and it also contains some neoliberal discourse about materialism that is kind of chopped up in pieces in the middle. This is A Guest of the Internationals. In a dream called A Guest of the Internationals, my ideal house appears on a green hillside on an island. It's white, eco-friendly, brimming with natural light. But when I go out in the world, everything presents itself at once. Everything is displayed as if it were all on sale. Turns out, materialism restores dignity and intellectual integrity with easy to perform, sublime mysteries, though it can take the form of a spiritual consumerism tailored to one's own unhealthy individualism in a false autonomy. So, if we really are out to monetize the revolution, to move away from familiar safe texts toward innovative writing, a critical and exploratory poetics driven by the innovation that makes private enterprise, then what? Partially dissolved, exhausted, but doesn't all text feel manipulated? In a lucid dream, we could redirect the action. Today, we're moved along wide interstellar intervals, proper nouns. Invisible like the silent bee in debt, it begins sleep or trance as a time comes to sweep away the dust, the individual granules of crushed stone that make up the moments of our attention, till it strays off target again, like 19th century prose. The next one I want to go to is a poem called In Chromatic Weather. This one started off as a little exercise because I had been writing a lot of those manifestos and I wanted to use the personal pronoun I again, but I didn't get it in there. But that was a good try, I guess, for that. Mainly, it's set in a kind of dreary January when it was around my birthday. I think I was a little depressed and thinking about the commercialization, how much Christmas is a commercial holiday. So this is In Chromatic Weather. Old stake of winter resistance and this siphoning off of daylight, imagining clacks and claps of chopping wood, and act like stepping quickly into frame. Signing, we arrive on Ferris wheels, riders of a cresting wave, insurgents of seasonal convictions, blandly transmogrified into copyrighted catchphrases. Worn hearts turn meaning into value, even at velocities where time turns into space. Charity is a means, reflecting what a headless hierarchy bestows, but it just sounds like an ad. Winter's intimate polemic, its unsettling calm. Here we're to redeem the sign, still requires exact change. Another aspect of my obsession with capitalism is my fears of global warming. The new IPCC report just came out, and it's going to look a little more apocalyptic than the last one did. I wrote this poem called Evaporating Rivers after I saw a PBS documentary about how the Colorado River doesn't actually reach the sea anymore. It just kind of keeps going, and then it gets shallow, and then it becomes mud, and then it becomes nothing. And it's in part because of the drought, the great drought that is happening in that part of the world. So the first about 2/3 or so of this poem is about the Nashua River, which runs from somewhere in New Hampshire down through Fitchburg and Leominster, Mass, where I grew up. The Nashua River was one of those great American rivers that used to catch on fire back in the day because it dumped so much junk into it. Fitchburg, Mass had the second textile mill ever built in America. The first one was built in Rhode Island. A guy in England he used to work at one in England. He stole the plans and went to Rhode Island and built his own, the first one. Another guy did the same thing to him, was working there, stole the plans, and went to Fitchburg and built one there. But at this time, when I was growing up, we used to spend a lot of time tramping around in the woods, and the river smelled really bad. But then after a while, it got cleaned up. And this was the era of the EPA, which unfortunately has been destroyed since then, starting from Reagan onward. But the river was clean. You couldn't eat a fish out of it, but it's clean and beautiful. So that's what the first part is about. The second part is about today's time. So I have a little epitaph here. It's water gives life to the 10,000 things. That's in the Tao Te Ching from the writer Lao Tzu. I'm not saying any of those words correctly, but so here it is. A river like a series of echoing syllables, its greenish gray stench, a city of blank stares in a cause shaped as a media narrative, back when it was legal to dump sewage and industrial waste into rivers and light them on fire. A pre-industrial vision turning sludge-filled flows, oxygen-starved, biologically dead, into clear waters full of fish, turtles, mink, otters, ospreys, increasing property values. A wild and scenic destination promoting the power to create change. We had become consumers of ecological miracles, planet healers. Now, in a time when the movement lacks a unifying cause, rivers are evaporating. Experts are predicting water wars, a future of scarcity. The world, this is your card here, but reversed, meaning an end to a cycle of life, tectonic shifts. Lastly, an image of gasping fish flip-flopping in hot mud. I was really angry when I wrote that poem, and I still am. Every time that IPCC report comes out, I'm gonna switch to something different. This is a poem called Irish Laughter that I wrote for my mother and read it at her funeral. My sister had asked me to write something. I was like, okay, great, I got 3 days to do this. So I was driving out to New York State to pick up my daughter. I was kind of thinking about it on the way. The poem mentions two cardinals. My mother and father, there used to be these two cardinals that would kind of fly through their bushes and stuff. And my mother named them Stanley and Helen. That was her uncle and aunt. And so it's used as a symbol. I actually Googled this, and cardinals can kind of represent this idea of the spirits of the dead coming back and visiting us. So that was kind of the image there. So this is Irish Laughter. Irish laughter, breaking glass, and where you are now, perhaps in this book, in the words, a figure glided quietly from bed to bed, smoothing a blanket, settling a pillow, every night, naming each of us in your prayers. About 4:36 a.m., I see you on my couch, a firefly whispering love as a tonic to adversity. This only days after the super blood moon lunar eclipse. Souls of the dead sometimes return to us as birds, like your two cardinals did. But when I step out into the cold now, the trees are birdless. It's your laughter we've come to hear. It's the light in all of our rooms. I think the final one I'll do, this is a poem I wrote to my daughter. I can find it here. It's thinking about her future. It's called Rise and Shine Dance, which was the name of the first dance she ever did when she was a little girl. And she wanted to be she's a 4-year-old ballerina. So that's the name of the dance. But the poem is actually worrying about those global warming issues in it here and trying to, deny they exist, I guess. This is called Rise and Shine Dance. So the dancing is a cure. The drums wild, like movement in painting, flashes of color equal to the strife of future years, careless of days going off the rails and emptying into an evaporating atmosphere, or recurring, shaping a kind of mimicry of motion and intent that becomes the mean by which others are recognized, awakening to an even greater understanding of the interdimensional self. All this, but what if there was more beyond these shifting, shiny surfaces where an ineluctable sea strips away the sand and gathers us all up like stars into the spoken word? The real cost includes the risk of not having, in a future where each day is a delight, where music and dancing fill your house. Those last two lines are kind of bitterly ironic. They were stolen from the Epic of Gilgamesh, after Gilgamesh realizes that there is no afterlife for human beings, so you have to make the best of what you have now. Thank you very much. This has been a great time.
I think everyone should feel free to unmute and give all the poets a big hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to David. You really had me thinking deeper about language and how to use language when we're all part of this transactional culture, and want to criticize it. How do you approach that kind of political poem, and also thinking about a materialistic world facing the kind of scarcities that we're facing. So very, very powerful and thought-provoking. And we do have room for 2 more in the open mic. And before we get to that, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any and all of our poets any questions that came up for you during their readings. Or you can put them in the chat if you don't want to unmute.
I don't have a question, but I have comments, if that's possible.
Of course.
Barbara, I really liked how you linked together the social fabric of humanity. You kind of moved from the one to the many and back to the one. And there was kind of an inherent how we need to be responsible for one another. I really liked also how you linked the photography and the poems. Naomi, you had so many great lines that I can't keep up with the lines when people are reading. So I just kind of do my impressions, but you understand the silences. You're concrete, but theological, beautiful, deep, profound. And I think you kind of move from emptiness to fullness and the interaction between the two. I really liked it a lot. And David, you get a little bit more here because I got better at just doing impressions and not trying to follow every line and trying to write it down. And for me, in responding to your poem, like taking a walk, a journey down the street, struggling in the journey, sleep and trance, walking and dream, history interpenetrating the now, questioning everything, arguing with self, society, the present, the past, the future, lest I say, though you probably won't agree, God, questioning all that is coming and all that is. That's kind of my responses.
Wow, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That was fantastic. Thanks so much.
I have a question. I'm just curious. It's kind of a big question, but if each of the poets just could say something about how you put your book together, how you assembled your manuscript, or what that process was like for you. I'm curious to hear about that.
Well, I'll start. I have to find the first poem. I have to find what's going to be the first poem before I can put it together. So in my first book, the first poem was a poem I wrote called Note to My Daughter that I wrote to her before she was born. And it was kind of nice because that felt to me like the poem that said, this is how you're going to write. And so that became the thing. And when I can find the first one, I can do the rest of them. For this one, it was the same thing. I had different titles. I had different poems to start with it. And actually, it was my daughter who recommended that I start with that one and call the book Violet Ideologies. I'm really good with 2-word titles, Proletariat Sunrise, Violet Ideologies. And she tells me the next one has to have two words too, but it kind of has 3 at this moment. But I have to find the first poem. And then I'll lay them out like on the floor and sort of look at them. And there's certain points. So there's the first one, the middle one, and the end one, and then fill in the gaps from there. That's how I did it.
Thank you.
I'll bite, Hillary.
Thank you.
Even though this is new book event, the new book was over 2 years ago. It's kind of distant in memory. Here, I didn't hold it up here. Can I see it? I can't see it in the
Pull it back a little bit.
back.
Blurry for some reason.
Can you see it? It's like a blur when I look at it.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of a blur.
Yeah, okay. I guess I grouped poems spanning quite a number of years in their composition, a little bit by subject matter, and then sort of just linkages, whether an image or a word or an idea. They kind of fell into groups, and so I had 4 sections. But I've never had projects as a poet, and they have to cohere on their own, not from my doing. Thanks for asking.
I will echo more of Naomi's methodology, that I picked poems that I liked and thought were good enough, and then I tried to find some kind of connection among them. I did not start with my first poem. Actually, it was originally towards the rear, but it became the first poem. And I think that for me, I tried not to clump too many together that were of similar subject. I tried to find a different kind of thread. So so that I could spread out, like I have a number of Chinese poems. I tried to spread them out through and not all in one section. So thank you for that question. It made me think, it's been a while, so it made me think how I put it together.
Well, I have a question I'd like to ask each of you, which is, do you feel that either your process of writing or your voice in your poems or the amount of time that you spend writing has changed over the last couple of years since the pandemic? I mean, I know some people have felt like, oh, they just couldn't write it, they were so overwhelmed, or has poetry been a refuge? And you feel like you've been writing in any new ways in response to it, in terms of language or process or amount of time you put into it? It's kind of an say anything you'd like kind of question.
I'll start first since I went last. Yes, it has changed quite a bit because I usually do narrative poems, and I've been more isolated. I do poems about observation, about people I know and meet, and I haven't been meeting many new people except on Zoom. So I have ended up going back into history and childhood and examining that during the pandemic, and that's different for me.
Interesting.
No, not different.
Yeah, I don't know if mine, I mean, I haven't been as productive as I probably would like. I've felt very isolated because I'm working at home. Luckily, I can do that. I teach at Mount Wachusett Community College, so I've been teaching online, which I find overwhelming because I never really did that before. And it's like kind of a challenge because there's no response. When you're a teacher, there's more going on than me just looking at a screen like that. The other thing, I guess, is I've got more to say on this idea of, which I regard the process of commodification now as the spiritual experience of capitalism. And I've been trying to follow up a little bit more on that. I've got more to say, and I'm kind of getting started on it pretty well, but not as productive again as I probably would have liked. But I come in phases. So sometimes I do nothing for a long time and then I do a lot. And then do nothing. I do a lot. It's never steady. It's never been steady for some reason.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Well, anybody there are no more questions? Last chance for questions, and if not, we will move into the open mic portion of our program. Thank you to our three poets. Wonderful reading.
So I have got 9 names so far for the open mic. I'm just going to read through them, and if you want to be added, we've got room for one more. And please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. So I have Keith Tornheim, Chris O'Carroll, Jeffrey Brommer, Ralph Culver, Ruth Hoberman, Jessica Lucci, Denise Washington, Lynn VT, and Karen Sauer.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So if there's one more person who'd like to read, just put your name into the chat, and we'll start now with Keith Tornheim.
Thank you. Marvelous readings. So Passover is coming up, Jewish Passover. So this is related to that. East wind, west wind. For the 8th plague, Moses once more stretched out his rod over Egypt at God's command. And the east wind became God's other messenger, bringing the giant swarm of locusts to cover the land. There was darkness that spoke with the rustle of millions of wings, the skitter of millions of tiny feet, the grinding of millions of mouths, until all that was green in the land was devoured. And when Pharaoh relented for a time, the west wind cleansed the land of the locusts, blew them into the Red Sea, which became black with them, and the fish rose to the surface of the sea and devoured them in turn. The fishermen of that coast said the fish of that year grew to 3 times the size of those of the years before and after. Later, the east wind was the Hebrews' salvation when it raised up the waters of the Red Sea to make walls on their right hand and on their left, leaving the damp path between, the escape route from Egypt to Sinai's desert. And when they had passed, the west wind collapsed the waters onto the pursuing Egyptians and tore off their chariot wheels and drowned them. Still later in the desert, it was the east wind that brought the manna from heaven to feed the people, and the west wind that brought the flock of quail, the single serving dropped from the sky. The east wind and the west wind are the hands of God. The one brought the locusts and the other swept them away. So it is when a person is to be born, the east wind carries his soul to earth, and when he dies, the west wind carries it back to where it came from. And so it was the west wind that went sweeping through Egypt to execute the final plague, carrying off all the firstborn sons, from prince to lowly servant. And the Hebrews huddled safe behind their blood-smeared doorways and heard the wind roar. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. And next up is Chris O'Carroll.
Thank you, Hillary. One of my brothers is a doctor, and it has become kind of a family tradition to donate our bodies to the med school where he studied. Now, when my time comes and these young doctors in training are availing themselves of my donation, I will not be able to have a word with them about the situation. So I thought I would have a word with them here today. This is to a medical student dissecting my cadaver. You'll see me from many an angle I myself could never wangle, and I can't guess how much respect it's reasonable to expect as all my scars and imperfections yield to your intimate inspections. In your shoes, I might deride me while I looked around inside me, eyeing the organs I abused by what I didn't use or used. So feel entitled to a joke about the flesh you slice and poke. Saving lives and easing pain are worthwhile skills you hope to gain from what my innards can reveal. If laughter aids that, no big deal. I will be too deceased to mind your quips about what you might find. Someday, your manner by the bed of any patient who's not dead will feature sober empathy, but cut yourself some slack with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And next is Jeffrey Braumer.
This is somewhat on the theme of Keith's, though I wrote it originally on April 1st, 1999. And as I was walking my dog around the block today, I thought of it. It's called Moses in New England. If Moses lived in New England, he would have seen God in the spring when forsythias bloom, burning yellow bushes all aflame. No blowing sands, except on drifting beaches of Rhode Island or Cape Cod, but a lot of bare tree limbs swaying in the cold north winds. No grass yet, March chill still here, thick mud and brown grasses in fields, and last November's dead leaves yet littering forest and backyards. It's a cold, damp, windy world, rain almost every day. In New England, no caravans or shit droppings of camels, but clammy gray poop of rasping seagulls on piers, city sidewalks, and suburban malls parking lots. And road rage almost every day, traffic jams, and soon summer smog. If Moses had lived in New England today, where would God call him? And when? At work, using his iPhone, in a Zoom meeting, or an email? At home, sleeping, in a dream, or on a bus, a subway, stuck at a red light, surfing the web, streaming a movie, or driving a rush hour rotary? There is no herding of sheep here either. Stars cannot be seen clearly except when out to sea or way up north in Maine, Vermont, or New Hampshire. Moses, Moses, Moses. The world has changed. Pharaohs are now gone, but what they stood for still remains. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And next up is Ralph Culver.
So let me unmute myself. Can everybody hear me? Hello, New England Poetry Club. It is great to see everybody, and what a really wonderful reading. It's just so nice to be here. I wanted to read a poem from my new book, which if you can, I don't know if you can see it. It's called A Passable Man. It's from Manhattan Press. And if anybody's going to be in Pittsburgh next Saturday, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at White Whale Bookstore, I'll be reading with Jeff Oakes and Nancy Corbel at 7 p.m. That's White Whale Bookstore in Bloomfield section of Pittsburgh. I'm going to read a poem called To March. I know we're a little bit into April at this point, and happy National Poetry Month, everybody. But I think a lot of the details about the weather, especially in this poem, still hold true. So, To March. Cutting carrots for soup. I'm distracted by the trees outside the window, their branches making sweeping gestures through pale air half an hour before sundown, officious, yet somehow disinterested. The somber limbs directing, urging us to move more quickly past the scene of some disaster or other and go about our business. And I think, that's March, isn't it? They stand, the trees, above cracked plates of snow that look like a pile of slate shingles just tumbled off a truck and spilled around the trunks in shards. But that's March too. The declining sunlight suddenly flaring up across a glaze of ice that appears without warning at a bend in the road, this unavoidable fact about yourself and the moment. And you realize as you turn the steering wheel smoothly into the skid, that you are at ease with the prospect of any possibility. Everything in the bed shifts as you hit dry pavement and then goes cascading. The whole load thunders overboard. But you've stopped. Somehow you're on all four tires. And when you climb out of the cab, there is the wind, that storied, oft venerated wind moaning and clawing at your throat, a lover who wants you or wants you dead. Maybe both, probably both, I think. Looking across the snow crust, gathering murk as dusk settles in, winter each day just a bit more distant, each day itself just a bit longer and brighter than the last. And return to the comfortable heft of the knife, the kitchen sweetened by steaming broth and promise, another seeming catastrophe survived. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. And next is Ruth Hoberman.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for your readings. I don't know how many of you were young in the 1970s, but this is dedicated to all of you in your 20s in 1973 or so. How I Lost My Fashion Sense. Those New York women scare me in their black or yellow dresses, their shoes like belligerent birds. You'd never guess I lived there in the 70s, near Max's Kansas City, too shy to dare the back room, but smart enough for the stupid stuff you do mid-20-ish, like drowsing late night on the IRT after gin and tonics in Fern Bars on First Avenue, and smoking, always smoking. Flick of ash, the glow, the gray thread rising, setting fire to my inbox once, though no one minded in that rundown office where I worked for $250 a week, with red-haired Norma who lunched for hours, and Pat who praised my legs, and Sebastian who looked 16, but weekends cradled wine in doorways on Lower Fifth, and Bill who wandered from office to office, a prophet proclaiming we were all repressed, not straight. And the winter night I ran up 6th Avenue, soaked in moon and windowed light on phosphorescent snow, me and the new boyfriend, like Dr. Zhivago in his gray fur hat, slim and mustached, who knew his Chardonnays and hadn't yet decided he was gay. I wore my fluffy hair and muskrat coat,
oblivious as everyone was to future fashions and what would come. And then I left for treeless fields of soy and corn and local news that mentioned soil temperature. When they died, I was gone, those brilliant young men, that decade of death. And I lost touch with the clothes they wear in cities, what belt to wear, what purse, what shade of blue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And next is Jessica Lucci.
Hello, thank you for including me. I've loved all the featured poets and the open mic poets. You guys are all so talented. I'm going to read to you from my brand new book, How Can I Steal a Purse? It just came out for National Poetry Month. And the poem I'm reading is called Perhaps the Joy Ends Here. The world begins with a word, not the word, but a word. Pen clutched in clawed hand, brush dripping blood on stone, mouth open, spitting vowels. Cassandra's words were knotted around her throat, her voice raspy like the devil's snake. Bear witness to my words. I am not a myth. My cursive on yellow paper is real, tactile. Touch me, lick me, taste my poems in the back of your throat, threatening your gag reflex with spewing sounds. Confirm the beginning of my shifting thoughts, shared with illness on an ambulance's tail, till it dies in the bloom of extinction, without language, devoid of imagery, back to the beginning. This is the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. And next is Denise Washington.
Hello, happy National Poetry Month. And I'm going to read, I think I need to put my glasses on here. I'm going to read my poem, In Search of a Crescent Moon. Let's see. There we go. I see you roaming amongst the ancient chisel cliffs, illuminating raw, receiving a glow, embracing the glorious gift that only the chosen ones know. I hear you uttering the call to prayer, bowing down, a sweet presence in the atmosphere, forehead to ground, dates with nuts in your hands, 5,419 miles apart. The bottom of your Kadia collecting the Sahara sand. I feel the beats of your Kemetic heart. I taste the hibiscus tea. I smell the lotus flowers you gave to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And next is Lynn Vitti.
Denise, that was great. I was there. I want to thank Barbara, Naomi, and David. Really enjoyed hearing you all read, and thanks to Wendy for emceeing and to Hillary for organizing us. I'm going to read a poem called Starter Wedding. I had the wedding I wanted, no white gown. I chose a Vogue pattern. The dressmaker sewed it of blue crepe. Shoes dyed to match. I wore tiny silk flowers tucked into my hair. The best man said I looked like Liz Taylor. We were standing in the mist at the side door of the Cathedral of Mary Our Queen. At the very moment my betrothed and I stood at the altar, Jackie Kennedy was marrying Aristotle Onassis on Scorpios. We all know how that turned out, not exactly a love match. My father wanted a nuptial mask, Ave Maria sung by a soprano, me kneeling before the statue of the Blessed Virgin, laying my bouquet at her feet, but I was marrying a lapsed Baptist, so no mass, no Blessed Mother, and I wanted to toss my bouquet at the reception. The priest was brief, uttered the necessary words to constitute the sacrament of matrimony. My uncle was scandalized by my mini dress. My mother had handwritten the invitations, short notice. Everyone thought I was pregnant. I cried when my aunt embraced me, handed me a tissue, whispered, "Don't ruin your makeup. You'll look like a raccoon." My groom wore a bespoke suit, slender. At 24, his hairline already receding. He was beaming. It was the happiest I ever saw him that day, when it all seemed so promising. Jackie Kennedy and me, brides with different motives. If you'd asked each of us 6 months later, we might have agreed on this much. Some people get married for the wrong reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And our last poet in the open mic, Karen Sauer.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this so much. This is really, really fun. I was trying to write a song about imagining having to leave your home at my age. I like what's happening to people in Ukraine, but it wouldn't become a song, so I guess it's a poem. It's called Wear a Name Tag. Once bold and agile, now old and fragile and slow. Where you gonna go? Pack 7 decades into one bag. Better wear a name tag. Trade privacy and being clean for bad dreams and worse news. Wear comfortable shoes. Prepare to stand with outstretched hand. Staying will kill you, but running will too. Stress seizes you, freezes you, but to wait for you might be fatal. So when you hesitate, no one tells you, take your time. Get in line. If you forget who you are, read your name tag. Enough said. Can't you die in your bed instead and avoid the crowd? Your own familiar sheets for a shroud? Swaddled in worn cotton, you may feel forgotten. You may feel forsaken. But when you meet your maker, he'll greet you warmly after a discreet glance at your name tag.